For years now, people have been predicting that games would soon be made out of prefabricated objects, bought in a store and assembled into a world. And for the most part, that hasn't happened, because the objects in the stores are trash. I don't mean they look bad or that they're badly made, although a lot of them are. I mean they're trash in the way that food becomes trash as soon as you put it in the sink. Things are made to be consumed and used in a certain context, and once the moment is gone, they transform into garbage. Over time, we've poured more and more refuse into this vast digital landfill that we call the internet. It now vastly outnumbers and outweighs the things that are fresh and untainted and unused. When everything around us is cultural trash, trash becomes the new medium, the lingua franca of the digital age. And you can build culture out of trash. But only trash culture. B games, B movies, B music, B philosophy. Maybe this is what digital culture is. A monstrous mountain of trash, the ash heap of creativity's fountain. A landfill with everything we ever thought of in it. Grand, infinite, and unsorted.
These are the words of Bennett Foddy, spoken throughout his game, Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy. A game that you may only recognise from the widespread phenomenon of YouTubers and streamers rushing to conquer its frustrating and punishing gameplay. I used to run through Getting Over It countless times, trying to cut my time down as much as possible. 7 minutes and 36 seconds was the best I ever got. So I heard this speech a lot of the times on my way to the top of the mountain. And it always stunned me how much philosophical discourse could come from what seemed to be a simple rage game on the surface. But Getting Over It contains a lot more nuance under its peaks than you might come to believe. Bennett Foddy was inspired by internet game developer Jazzuo's Sexy Hiking, which on a first glance can look like a shoddily put together amalgamation of different readily made set pieces to make a slightly frustrating but ultimately simplistic game to annoy you for an hour or so. However, it inspired Bennett Foddy enough to follow his passion to create as Jazzuo did. Jazzuo was chasing the passion to create, rather than attempting to market his product to any specific audience. This is what inspired Foddy, an amalgamation of different objects put together to create a new and polished piece. But Bennett Foddy created most of the assets for Getting Over It himself, listing all the ones he didn't create in the credits of his own game. However, he still intended to give you that same feeling of a B game. The mountain you have to climb with just a hammer is formed of several different sections. Some sections could slightly resemble a real mountain, but different parts take forms like a building site, a large clump of boxes, or a pile of discarded and unwanted objects. Bennett Foddy still manages to deliver a feeling of a B game. Unwanted objects thrown together in a way that could only exist in the context of a video game. Floating rocks and thumbs sticking out of brick walls, an orange on a table far up into the clouds above ground level. It looks lazy and uninspired, but it's not. It's deliberate, meant to be understood as trash art. And this is what Bennett was referring to in the preface to this video. And the term trash art sounds quite insulting. Like I'm insinuating Foddy's work should be discarded as waste. That couldn't be further from the truth. It's often harder to create art out of the shrapnel of other creatives than it is to create something completely original. And it should be understood that it in no way makes any of the pieces I'll speak about in this video less of a work of art than any other. So if you consider using Unity assets in your game to be cheating, don't watch this video. If you consider music sampling to be less artistically creative than original pieces, don't watch this video. Trash culture has been around a lot longer than internet culture, and although the internet does feed on trash art, it is not mutually exclusive to the internet. Foddy was correct in his monologue. Trash has become the internet's medium. It was after hours of scrolling TikTok that made me discover that most of the videos I watched were being assembled into a personal museum of trash art for me to go back to. And I was hoarding these in my saved videos. Thousands upon thousands of people were making edits of their favourite shows, games and media, and I was consuming them en masse like garbage. Every time I went back to my saved videos, I felt like I'd compiled a collection of needles in an endless haystack that I still can't quite comprehend. Is a compiled edit of clips truly worth being called art? So that's what this video is about. Trash art, trash culture, and all of the B-sides of the modern creative space. The world of creating art out of a pile of discarded pieces. We know trash. We know clean don't last, never last when we load trash. We upload trash. Face down, trash begets trash. And that right there is a Death Grips quote. Wow, we're taking a bracing start to this video. When it was received, the Society of Artists in 1917 stated that it was by no definition a work of art. One of the most controversial pieces of art in the history of art itself, and it can't even agreeably be objectively described as art. Born from a rejection of the Society of Independent Artists and what they deemed to be art, Duchamp submitted Fountain and subsequently left the society out of protest. He believed that art should be for the mind and not for the eye. Fountain may be the most popular piece that can be described as trash art. It is a urinal, turned upside down, signed, and dated. This particular urinal was one of the most massively produced urinals at the time of Fountain's creation. It is a piece birthed out of the ordinary. The rejection of Fountain in the art community is its paramount importance. It's art that was meant to be discarded, and subsequently was so. The original Fountain has been lost, as its use preceded its later popularity in the art world. Duchamp submitted it for it to be rejected, and subsequently to have done with it. And that piece of art was repurposed into a cultural shift, seen across the whole of the art world. This urinal stood for a lot more than its displeasing looks. Fountain is a serenade to the beautiful dance between the artist and the viewer. It marks a period in history where art became a voice of meaning, not a display of talent. It's one of the most prominent ready-mades to ever exist. That being an object that is repurposed to be a work of art, solely due to the artist's creative interpretation. It reimagined the role of the artist, the role of the viewer, and the role of art itself. Seeing all three of these things as separate entities that merely interact with each other and don't exist within a linear time frame. Duchamp is also the guy who put the mustache on Mona Lisa. So if you've ever seen this on a t-shirt in a tourist shop, you've got 20th century absurdist culture to thank. Duchamp refers to art that is solely meant to be enjoyed for its visuals as retinal art, and promptly rejected it entirely. He believed it was anti-intellectual to create art that didn't stimulate a viewer's mind, which is ironically seen as some to be anti-intellectual in its lack of visual stimulation. However, modern art often only seeks meaning. It does not seek to simply please its audience. Some of this is seen within Dadaism, although Dada is viewed more as anti-everything. Nonsensical art dreamt out of the retaliation of the First World War in Zurich, Switzerland. Dadaism was made to challenge the social and political norms of the 1910s. And a lot of it was garbage. Things like poems written from cut-up newspapers and jumbled up in a bag and taken out in a random order to make a meaningless string of sentences. Duchamp's Fountain is often linked to Dadaism, again questioning what can be considered art. It's what we can still see echoing through both modern art museums and internet culture to this day. One of the more modern trailblazers for Dadaism is Terry Gilliam. His work on Monty Python is some of the most brilliantly absurd art I've ever seen reach such heights of popularity. He created his sketches mostly out of collage work, from cutouts he'd sourced from old magazines and real photographs. The ensuing amalgamation of frame-by-frame animation often takes a surrealist tone in his work, meant to scrutinise and reject bourgeois society. Monty Python as a whole was a revolution for the entertainment industry in its protest to everything that was on screen. It made fun of religion, of society, of class, of every normality that surrounded it. Terry Gilliam's work is symbolic of this period of change, as it remains timeless in its visionary depictions. He was mocking the world around him by recycling its trash and repurposing it into fresh and surreal animations. He was willing to showcase how the machine of creativity could be churned and churned and churned, to regurgitate culture back into the face of the masses, to run from societal norms and humour the whole industry with his weird and facetious work. Basquiat's work also has this aspect of sampled art. His work with semiotics and symbols he'd seen in textbooks and art was groundbreaking. He was a pioneer in the form of used art, often stenciling in work he'd seen in other parts of his life to recycle smaller ideas into a bigger picture. He was famous for how quickly he could stir up new pieces, never focusing on the same ideas for too long. He owed a lot of his work to Dada, not just in its absurdity, but it's an acceptance of reuse, of working with what he already had and creating new things out of it, rendering his art as Lego pieces, ready to be broken down and remade into something fresh and exciting to him. While it's quite a challenge to translate Dada to video games and how they present themselves, there are definitely entries in which absurdity and rejection of society are prominent. Cruelty Squad is the first game I've ever played where I found my job as an audience member to be a genuinely hard task. Bordering on pure ugliness, Cruelty Squad doesn't allow itself to be appealing or palatable. My first playthrough I played for about 30 minutes before I decided it just wasn't for me and completely gave up. It's fun to look at as a novelty, to marvel at its weird and abstract level designs, the demanding UI and the lack of any real purpose or character motivations, but it doesn't exactly welcome you to instantly get on board with it past that initial curiosity. And I will admit its inclusion in this video is slightly deceiving. I'm kind of cheating by classifying it as trash art. It doesn't share its assets with anything else. In fact, it's probably the most original game I'll discuss in this video. For that reason, I want to be clear in saying that my inclusion of Cruelty Squad in this video is not meant to be insulting. I'm including it because Cruelty Squad knows that it's trash. Its visual clutter and hard-to-swallow design is intrinsic to its themes and contextual commentary. Cruelty Squad is an apt observation of corporate greed and societal dehumanization in the context of capitalism. Its own Steam page refers to the world of Cruelty Squad as a sewage-infused garbage world. Cruelty Squad is a game where consequences don't matter. If you die enough times, the game difficulty lowers, showing you that how well you do doesn't particularly matter either. There's a built-in stock market to the game, where you can actually invest in stocks that can get you more money to mutilate yourself with upgrades. It's all a commentary on the greed of the world, and its visual garbage represents the real garbage we all produce in our capitalistic lifestyles and environments. Cruelty Squad is the video game equivalent of non-retinal art. Visuals are only there to serve a purpose, not to be particularly enjoyed. You eventually begin to blur out the ugliness of Cruelty Squad's world, naturally becoming completely desensitized to it. Walls are replastered textures that resemble nothing of the settings they're meant to depict. There's symbols for money, gain, and greed everywhere, and everything is made to dull you to the killings and the way you step on everyone else, even yourself, to reach the top. It's only when you acknowledge that Cruelty Squad is inherently trash that trash becomes palpable and consumable. You begin to enjoy the game through all its visual debris. What was once hard to stomach is now hard to put down. Then you put the game down and start to think. The trash-tinted glasses come off, and you realise you've been playing the visual equivalent of vomit for the past 10 hours. Cruelty Squad is cunning in its themes and the way it grabs you. A finished game, all its coding and assets, can be moulded and manipulated to fit the form of a new creation, whilst still upholding all of the form of the original, through the use of mods, almost acting as a tribute to the author's previous work. Some of the most consistently modded games since their inception over 2 decades ago are Doom 1 and Doom 2. As the grandfather of boomer shooters, developers had constantly experimented with the form of the original Doom games to create their own work. Doom is often referred to as one of the most modded game series of all time, becoming almost an engine for new games at this point. One of my favourites as of recent has been Doom: The Gallery Experience. Described as an art piece parody, the Gallery Experience implores you to walk around and appreciate fine art while sipping wine and enjoying complimentary hors d'oeuvre in this beautifully renovated and reimagined Doom. And that's all that the Gallery Experience is. The first level of the original Doom, reimagined to be a pretentious wine-sipping gallery exhibition. No monsters, no threats, just a benign and harmless walking tour. And you have to wonder as you play it how we got to this point. Well, it's through consistent alterations on the original Doom that have caused it to reach a point of formlessness. A flotilla to an island of trash, meant for nothing more than expression and unruliness. And it's all reused. There's a link to where the sprites came from, where the music came from, even the resources for the art on display in this fictional gallery of class and exquisite taste. It's almost self-commentarial that a museum for high art would exist in a world made of what looked like surface-level creativity. Trash art pays no mind to people who simply view it as a waste of resources. In and of itself, it is the opposite of wasteful, recycling ideas to form abstract and fresh work. But to do justice to the modern community of Doom, I need to delve deeper than just the gallery experience. I need to talk about myhouse.wad. MyHouse definitely leans into the aspects of trash art I've explored earlier in this video. By that I mean it leans into the limitations of what it's capable of. It looks like Doom, it certainly plays like Doom. That's how it's able to take you right out of your comfort zone when you remember that it isn't Doom. Part creepypasta, part House of Leaves homage, myhouse.wad takes a second to get you introduced to its themes. The file you download comes with a document of journal entries from its creator, detailing how, at his best friend's funeral, the family of the deceased gave him a bunch of old Doom mods they'd made during their past. He found one his friend made that is an exact replica of his own house, and decides to help him finish it as a final goodbye to his dead friend. The next few pages of entries describe how the mod took over his life, how he took time off work to keep adding things to it, how he didn't want anyone else to work on it. Eventually, the mod almost starts working for itself, calling to him to keep working and to share it with other people. Once you boot it up, it plays out like a normal Doom mod. There's enemies throughout the house you have to kill, and keycard doors to progress as Doom normally would. Although, you notice that there's new doors that weren't there before. There's enemies where there wasn't the last time you passed through there. And the entrance to the house has suddenly vanished. You're stuck there, in a house that's constantly changing around you, making you uncover the dark history of this house and the family that lived there. I was taken aback. I didn't expect a simple mod to have such an impressive premise. I was also impressed with how much innovation was in the structural form of Doom 2. Creating a new world and a new game out of pre-existing parts, My House does more than make you feel like you're playing a rendition of Doom. It makes you forget how Doom played before you started this mod. I was constantly looking around my flat to check I was alone, to make sure the wall behind me was still there, and that the door out of my room wouldn't lead me down some dark passageway filled with madness and horror. My House wants you to think it's a normal Doom mod, a rendition of pre-existing parts with a new spin on it. My House is rudimentary in every positive sense of the word. The document attached with it is innovative in its ability to expand your mind outside the limitations of the mod. It wants you to forget what you know about Doom mods, how they work, what makes them tick, and what they can and can't do. Once you've done that, you can relax your mind enough to be genuinely frightened by its ability to conjure horror within its limitations. So what about audible trash? I already spoke about sampled music, but let's get more specific. Is there any music that compounds samples to create a level of auditory clutter that's worthy of being called garbage? Well, yes actually. In fact, there's a whole genre of it. Let me introduce you to the consistently disputed world of plunderphonics. Plunderphonics is a genre consisting of music and soundscapes that are created through the excessive sampling of other work. These samples are splayed out and reimagined to craft new compositions. The genre's origins can be traced back to 1985, where John Oswald coined the term plunderphonics in his essay, Plunderphonics, or Audio Piracy as a Compositional Prerogative. A rendition of plunderphonics became a staple of internet culture a few years ago was the work of Leyland Kirby, although you may know him as The Caretaker. His most popular work, Everywhere at the End of Time, was created over the course of 3 years, and is a narrative reimagining of the stages of dementia. It was sensational for its chilling topic, and was capable of moving many people to tears through its heavy themes. While the textual analysis of The Caretaker's stark and crushing symbolism in his audible environments is much discussed in online circles, the actual production of these pieces is a less popular talking point. The Caretaker took old ballroom songs and motifs and scattered them through the duration of a song, often accompanied by the crackling of an old vinyl or background static to fill in the blanks of these loops. The further you progress through his work, the more these samples start to sound like auditory hallucinations, dreamscapes and nightmares of forgotten memories and confusion. When you reach the final stages of the 6-hour tour, all musicality and rhythm has long since been abandoned. What's left is a bleak and empty field of noise and wind that is capable of stirring absolutely nothing. Occasionally, a motif or melody will pass along, but its endurance is that of a tumbleweed, passing through a lengthy nothingness. All of this is created through the persistent sampling that the Caretaker undertakes in his work. I don't have anything to add to the well of video essays on the Caretaker's work, so I'd like to pivot to what I feel is a sharp contrast to Everywhere at the End of Time. While the Caretaker is able to create environments out of the poignant and selective sampling of old music, the work of Christ is the regurgitation of years of internet culture, the auditory interpretation of overstimulation. Christ's music is what all music I play to my dad sounds like as soon as I play it through his car speakers. It is the conceptual extreme of plunderphonics, the answer to the question, how far can music sampling go? If Cruelty Squad is the visual refuse of society, Christ is the walking, talking detritus of internet culture and creation. John Zobel categorizes himself as vaporwave, and rarely appears in interviews about his work. Instead, he often chooses to let his sampling speak for him. He samples YouTube videos, popular music, interviews, YouTube poops, TV, film, and everything else he can find. It's quite miraculous how many different emotions Christ is able to conjure up through his use of sampling. It's audible dopamine condensed into jumps between motifs and themes that keep a sporadic but tangible rhythm to his music. One of his most notable albums, Deep Dark Trench, is a conceptual reaction to post 9/11 America, specifically 9/11 and America's response in the wake of it. Without being too specific or sampling footage from the event or anything like that, Christ is able to commentate a state of world affairs without any spoken word from himself, just his accomplished use of sampling. It's a challenging listen at times, there's no doubt about that. In fact, Christ himself has a spot on his website for negative reviews and responses to his music. But in that chaos, there are breakout moments of clarity and somber moments. Especially on the track American Dream, which features this great yawning ambient synth that moves through the whole song. The work of Christ is a culmination of trash internet culture that feels like forming a needle out of a sum of the haystack. The greatest thing about art is that it doesn't have to be for anyone. The art of creation is just as important of a process as the finished product. I always struggled on a personal level to deal with criticism for a lot of reasons. Often, I just felt like my peers were missing the point, like they were seeing something they shouldn't be seeing. Obviously, this just amounts to me being a big baby about it. But constant analysis and critique can take away from personal experience. Sometimes art should be kept subjective, because everyone is entitled to their own perspective. If we try to draw the artist's creative intention from every single bit of art, we sometimes don't see the forest for the trees. This is exactly why the Beginner's Guide was made. It's a series of little ideas stitched together into a full experience, and it was born from the mind of Davy Readon, creator of the Stanley Parable, one of the most creatively expressive games of the century. It's hard to sum up in a video like this because it's such an elaborate meta-narrative that I'd forget why I was speaking about it in the first place. So I'll just say that the Beginner's Guide is basically a big conflict between the creator and the consumer. Its story consists of small games that an imaginary author called Coda has created, and we are walked through these games by Davy as he explains what his interpretation of each one is. As he does this, his interpretation starts to almost mould what the next game will mean, subsequently creating a false narrative that Davy almost needs to see played out. It's a journey through the battle between creators who love to create and the need for that creation to be enjoyed by others, to be seen, to be coherent enough for others to relate and appreciate said work. I think that says enough without spoiling the entire plot for those who want to play it for themselves, but I'd just like to focus on the art of creation and how it's carried out throughout the Beginner's Guide. The game is created in the Source engine, and this is a plot point for Davy as he mentions the limitations and the nature of designing levels within the Source engine and its tools. The Source assets and simple design are there to carry out a job of sorts. Every single asset has a role in the bigger creation. They are not meant to be pored over and analysed, they're there to do a job. It's an asset of passion, of the love to create and experiment with new ideas. It must be slightly freeing to use what's given to you to express yourself with only the limits of the tools right in front of you. This is, for many, the way that game development begins. Simply exploring the limits and potential of an already established set of rules and tools. And it's in these limitations that expression is stirred up. By working within a frame of pre-established parts, you can stretch them as far as your imagination will take you, as you've locked yourself into a refined set of rules to carry out. For Coda, this expression is ultimately his holy grail. To create and refine his own work is more than he needs for self-expression, and he doesn't need to show anyone else what he's capable of. Davy, on the other hand, sees Coda's creations as an allegory for himself. To put it into different words, when Coda sees a plate of food, he sees the craftsmanship behind the meal, the work that went into making it. When Davy sees the same plate, he wants to understand why this particular plate of food is sitting in front of him. There must be some deeper reason to it. Davy's agitated when there's no clear structure, no meaning, no context. To Davy, there's nothing worse than art that's not made for him. So he adds meaning to these games, in an attempt to derive meaning from someone else's creation. He believes that his perspective is the right way for Coda's story to be told, when maybe Coda just wants to be able to tell a story for the sake of it, for others to be able to decide for themselves what the story is. And there is nothing worse to Coda than his art being purposed for the sake of someone else's interpretation. To Coda, once a piece of art is finished, the artist no longer exists, only the art remains. The beginner's guide would have probably read completely differently if it wasn't accompanied by Davy's narration. To mould Coda's work to create some long-standing narration and meaning that Davy's able to derive is what Coda believes is morally wrong. And that's kind of what trash art is. It's a rejection of art that requires you to pore over it and keep it. Trash art doesn't seek to be something that's maintained for years to come. It's not made with the intention of long-standing enjoyment. It exists to be made, enjoyed, and discarded. It's also not made for another person's interpretation, not made to fit your narrative, not made to be construed in any way. It's meant to be construed however you like it. And this isn't meant to be some maybe the curtains were just blue argument. To purposely ignore an artist's intention isn't right either, but sometimes it's enough to want to create art for yourself, or for others to use your art how they want. People's viewpoints are allowed to be respectively subjective, as stories are allowed to exist to be subjective. You cannot know an artist through their work, and an artist's work is allowed to be its own entity. Your own perspective on it doesn't belong to the author or anyone else. What this means is that authors and creators are allowed to have the passion to create without limiting themselves to consumer perception. Creating games like they're trash, like they can just be discarded right after the fact, tossed away with acceptance and happiness that they're finished. A truly artistic expression. You cannot see what I see because you see what you see. You cannot know what I know because you know what you know. What I see and what I know cannot be added to what you see and what you know, because they are not the same kind. Neither can it replace what you see and what you know, because that would be to replace you yourself. And we make art trash. We speedrun, we make edits, we turn beautiful works into memes and templates, and ignore artistic vision to appease ourselves. We decide how art affects us, and accept whatever trash comes along with it. Trash art isn't just a statement, it's a regurgitation of ourselves. Isn't that beautiful? Grand, infinite, unsorted.